Hello students, today in this video we will be learning about the topic friction as a force, and this is chapter 12 in your textbook. And in this chapter we have two objectives that we will be learning today. The first is learn the uses and difficulties caused by friction, and second, learn how to reduce friction. So before moving into deeper into the chapter, let me tell you that uh, in the last chapter or in the last video, we have learned different kinds of forces, and one among that was frictional force. And I have also mentioned that frictional force acts always opposite to the direction of the moving object. Okay, so let me give you an example. When you roll the ball on the floor, what happens is the ball, after moving up to a certain distance, it stops moving. And the other examples that I can give you is uh, when you ride a bicycle, you will have to pedal it continually to keep the bicycle moving. Okay, why is that? That is because of the contact force, which means that the force applied or exerted at the point of contact of one object with the other object. And as I have mentioned, that it is because of the force, the frictional force that moves opposite to the direction of the moving object. And one more thing, one more examples that I want to give you is when you try to walk or run on the wet floor, you will have the chance of slipping. Why is that? Because that is because of the less friction, or because the floor is very smooth, and on the smooth surface there is a less friction on it. So that is the reason you have the chance of slipping. So friction comes into play whenever any two objects are in contact with each other. Okay, and one object moves over the surface of the other object. For example, when you try to push a box, I have also given example, the similar example in the previous video, that is in the last chapter when I spoke about the frictional force. So I'm telling you once again, when you try to push the box that is kept on the floor, you will experience that the force that is applied on the object or on the box, or the frictional force, the direction of the frictional force will act opposite to the object that you are pushing on. Okay, that means the direction of the frictional force will move opposite to the direction of the moving object. Okay, now let us move on to the next point. Friction comes into play whenever there is a motion, and let me give you some of the examples that is mentioned in your book. Some of the examples from our day-to-day life are as follows. Firstly, a ball when you kick the ball and it comes to a rest on its own on the ground, and this is due to the friction between the ball and the ground. And you can draw and color because of the friction between the crayon and the paper. And the other example is the force of the friction between the blackboard and the chalk helps us to write on the blackboard. So these are some of the examples, from our day-to-day life when friction comes into play, whenever there is a motion. Okay, now let us move on to the next point, that is the difficulties caused by a friction. You know that the frictions, sometimes it may be useful and sometimes it may be harmful to us. So let us know some of the usefulness of the friction that is mentioned in your book. So you can follow the book, page number 138. Here it is mentioned that a buffalo will not be able to pull a cart until friction secures the buffalo's foot on the road. Friction helps in applying brakes of the vehicle. So it is because of the frictional force that is applied, uh, the vehicle stops. Okay. A carpenter won't be able to fix nails to make furniture without friction, and friction helps in holding the nails to the wood or wall. Football players have studs on shoes, and this prevents them from slipping. And the last is the friction between the floor and our feet prevents us from slipping on the floor. Now, there are also some of the difficulties that are caused by the friction. Friction can cause noise in machines. To reduce this, we can use lubricants such as oil and grease. Friction can produce heat in various parts of the machine. To move at a very high speed, vehicle should have a streamlined body. This reduces the friction with air and the amount of fuel the vehicle uses. Aeroplanes and ships have streamlined body. So these are some of the usefulness and the harmful or the difficulties caused by friction. And the other difficulties caused by friction is friction can also cause wear and tear. When two objects rub together, because of friction, heat is produced, and the sole of our shoe wear out due to the friction between the shoe and the ground. Okay, and we also observe that when we play carom board, why we use the powder, or why we sprinkle a powder on the carom board. It is because to reduce the friction between the wood coined tokens and the board. Now, second objective we have is learn how to reduce the friction. So how do we reduce a friction? Because as I have mentioned that too much of frictional force, when it can harm us in different ways. So in order to reduce the friction, we need to make the surface smooth, and as I have mentioned that we need to apply the lubricants. That means lubrication is very much needed, and making the objects streamlined. And it is good to reduce friction between the surface, and this makes the movement easier. Okay, if there is too much of friction, the machine won't move. Okay, so that is why sometimes we need to reduce the friction also. So why do we need to make the surface smooth is because a rough surface have more friction than the smooth surface. That is why we apply oil in the door hinges, which reduces the friction, and we sprinkle powder, as I mentioned, on the carom board to reduce the friction between the striker and the coins, so that it can move easily. So these are the things that are in this chapter, and I hope that you understood all the points that have been mentioned. So thank you once again, and have a nice day.